So Peter, what is a trust and how is it used?
A trust is a legal arrangement between a settlor and beneficiaries, whereby the assets are transferred from the ownership of what would be called the settlor into a trust relationship. The trustee then takes responsibility and ownership title of those assets and manages those assets in the best interests of the beneficiaries. People would generally use a trust in order for them to structure their assets for succession planning. That is to say that if an individual would have assets, whether that be bankable, real estate or other kinds of assets, they will be put into trust so that there will be longevity in those assets and there would be continuity in how those assets are developed and managed over time, even after the settlor's passing.
And Peter, today, to what extent does the jurisdiction make a difference?
There's a number of jurisdictions that could be used for a trust, and that would depend on the requirements of the client. That would include the choice of the jurisdiction of the law of the trust, but also of where the trustee is located as well. So the jurisdiction choice would depend on what kind of reserve powers the settlor may want to have. It would also depend on the asset protection that they're looking to have, and equally the longevity of the trust. Different jurisdictions will have a different perpetuity period for that trust. Singapore, as an example, would have a 100-year perpetuity period on a specific trust.
Peter, what assets should be placed in the trust?
The kinds of assets that people would put into a trust would be the obvious monetary, but also real estate. There would be aircraft, yachts, artwork, jewellery, as an example, special kind of assets, indeed, cars, etc. They would be put into trust so that specific instructions could be given to the trustees so that they could manage those assets in accordance with the settlor's wishes, and those wishes would be followed by the trustee even after the settlor's death. As an example, the settlor may decide that he would like one of his children to only receive a distribution from the trust only at the age of 23, and only if they're not married, or they may indicate that a specific house could only be used by a specific beneficiary, or a specific item of artwork could only be distributed upon certain hurdles being raised.
And can you give me some more practical examples of why a trust is set up?
Yep, a trust could be set up for asset protection, as an example. A house could be settled into trust, or indeed an aviation asset could be settled into trust, and that would devolve the ownership from the settlor, the individual, away from the asset. In particular, an aviation asset, a private aircraft, whilst flying. Obviously, if something happens to the aircraft whilst it's in flight, and touch wood, nothing would ever happen, but if it did, that aircraft went down, there would be a fair amount of liability put onto that aviation asset. If it's held in a trust or held in a company, then the liability would be held with the owner, or the legal title owner of that aviation asset, and that would be the trust, and that wouldn't be the individual who had settled that trust in the first place.